at Horizon 7, and Paul Morrison, who's Managing Director of Proservartner. Welcome and thank you for joining us.
Lovely. When I came today, I thought what we were going to do was we would sit up here, we'd have a nice little conversation about agile sourcing. I'd forgotten what it was like to work with Kelly. It's fantastic because she will then say, no, let's not do that. Let's make sure that we get everybody involved so we can have a bit of a conversation up here. But the most important thing is that I'm going to try and get, maybe not everyone, you know, somebody's sitting there thinking, I know nothing about model sourcing, but we'll see if we can get lots of people to pitch in. So thank you very much, David. That was fantastic. It's great to be able to get a starting point, I think. And what I was always taught when I was going through all my academic stuff was that you need to try and find a number of different sources to validate any of the ideas that people have. So David, I think we would consider to be a pretty decent source, do you think? You look at him and you think, oh, he seems as though he's been around the block. He's done a bit. So, and in fact, he's got so much experience in the world of procurement. I'm really lucky that I've got on the panel Melanie Humphries, who, you've done a bit as well, haven't you? Yeah, you've done a bit. So Melanie's background is very much on the supply side, I think I'm right in saying. Having spent a long time, let's say. It's a long time. With supply companies, particularly on the commercial side. Yeah. So we've got that particular sort of view from that side of the sourcing arrangement. And then Paul Morrison. Paul has, I think, spent an awful lot of time in the advisory space, but also on the delivery side as well. So Melanie, perhaps you'd just like to just give us a very quick sort of introduction.
Yeah, so I'm the MD of Horizon 7. We've been here for a couple of years, and we specialise in agile sourcing. But I guess my journey to that point was one of extreme frustration on the supplier side of the technology world, where I'd sit there trying to have conversations with clients and law firms and advisors and consultants about SaaS services, cloud services, and I'd sit in an RFP process that took 2 years and obviously often didn't come to a conclusion, or I was handed a contract that wasn't fit for purpose, and I was sitting there so frustrated. So I ended up being a supplier in an agile sourcing process that Horizon 7 was running, and I just decided I need to flip and be part of a change in the industry. And so we work with buyer clients, but we also work with suppliers, and I feel like I have a bit of a unique position in that I truly understand what it feels like to be in the supplier community, being part of a modern sourcing process, and what that means, how we need to change and adapt our ways of selling and supplying to support an industry that's going through this change right now. So hopefully that helps.
Yeah. Great, thank you very much. It sounds to me as though it's a road to Damascus type of experience. It's very long, but I was quite happy with my life. And then I saw the light, and the light was agile sourcing. So, wonderful story. Paul, how about you? What's your
Thanks, Bruce. Yeah, well, similar story, maybe not Damascus yet, but
you can wait, Paul. It'll come.
It did start a while ago on the supply side with Accenture as an consultant today, actually, in IT services. I've been working with BPO advisory for about 20 years now or so, and that really is helping buyers to understand the opportunity from finance, HR, procurement, IT, outsourcing, and trying to understand the market and then trying to make it work. And a lot of the points that have been made by David and Melanie really resonate. I think there's a lot of practical and emerging practices that are there that are making the whole experience better and more effective. And that's something that we do at my role at Proservartner. So we're finance advisors to finance leaders and GSA leaders on how to improve their performance through BPO automation and process improvement. That's me.
Yeah, great. Thanks, Paul. Could I just hide that? Any good? Okay, you feel more comfortable. Thank you. So where I wanted to start really was, Melanie, perhaps to ask you, David, gone through his thoughts very broadly, what he sees as being this concept of modern sourcing. What's your take on that? Do you subscribe to David's view of what modern sourcing is, or would you develop it in some particular way?
Of course I 100%.
There's the money there.
Thank you. No, I do subscribe to it. I do agree with it. I think there are bits of David's presentation that you can sort of shine a light on and super focus on. There's a couple of elements that perhaps worth digging into a little bit more. So I think the contracting piece is really important. What often happens in the traditional process, as David alluded to, is the contract's left to the end. We believe, the contract is part of day one. So you need to understand how your supplier organisations in the process are going to contract with you, how they're going to behave in a negotiation. You need to understand how the price and the terms relate to each other. You need to understand how the solution, the price and the terms relate to each other. So I see it as a parallel stream happening at the same time, that all of the sprints are feeding into each other in that sourcing process. So your contracting is informing your price and your solution and various other iterations. So I think the contracting is part of the offer. It requires a bit of work, a bit more work actually, through the process to build contract or redline contracts with a number of suppliers simultaneously. But what you're doing is you are getting a ringside view, so to speak, to how they are to engage with from a contracting standpoint, as well as all of the other things that you see in the process. So that would be the first thing I'd like to draw out. I think the second thing is, I've worked on agile sourcing processes that can take 6 weeks, and I've worked on ones that can take the longer end of the spectrum. I think a lot of that is informed by what you're buying and the buyer organisation. So sort of small agile organisations that can make decisions quickly, you can do it really, really quickly. Big organisations can run sourcing processes like this, but often the rest of their company can't operate as quickly as the sourcing process needs them to be. I had a recent engagement where it took 3 weeks just to get NDAs in place with the 4 suppliers to go to workshops. You can't run a modern agile sourcing process if it takes 3 weeks just to get NDAs turned around. So we need to think about, are we ready? Can we adopt this? And that is the same question to the supplier community as the buyer community, because all parties need to be on this ship to go in the same direction, because if we're not, it won't work. The supplier community is super important to this working. So those are the couple of elements that I think I'd sort of dig into a little bit more.
Great, thanks. I just noticed we've got a few lawyers in the room. There's a surprise. We're in Everest, Sutherland. Is there any lawyers in the room that would pick up on what Melanie was saying, that contracting is the bit that really comes at the start of this process? Megan's got a thought.
Yeah, I want to come up and help you, Melanie. Thank you. That's something, and we'll touch on it later in one of our panels through the legal lens, but that's exactly what we've said again and again to some of our customers. Don't leave it to the end, because you've already established particular situations, you've already established particular rapport with your supplier. You don't need us in the room. Sometimes you can be a little bit disruptive.
No.
But I think having that understanding that, ultimately this relationship, which is the most important thing, is going to be underpinned by this piece of paper. It's important to have that piece of paper up front and understand how it underpins going forward.
Yeah, great.
And you've got the competitive tension as well, let's be clear. There is competitive tension in that process, which drives minimising of red lines, maybe drives FAFO positions. So that just gets to the answer much quicker. You don't want to start a new relationship with a row over a contract because you've left the liability cap to discuss after you've down selected. It just doesn't work.
No, absolutely. Paul, what's your thoughts in terms of how you might develop David's ideas around modern sourcing?
And as you say, it's a really good foundation. I thought as we were preparing for the piece, modern sourcing in capital letters loomed in front of me, and I thought, oh my God, it's a big ism, it's a big idea, but it's a pragmatic one and a mindset one. And I really like that, because when I work with my clients and other organisations in the market, I think the reality is that most sourcing is not that modern. Certainly in BPO, in a process like finance, you've got that big chunk 6 month plus time frame, and very often it's just difficult to get it shorter. And we're approaching, I'm trying to arrange one now for a client. We've got the summer holidays coming up, we're trying to get the people together, and it's just, we need a bit of modern sourcing on top of it. But I think for me, a number of areas resonate, and I think we are seeing them. So things like that, the parallel activities, getting a good clear heads of terms with the key commercials up and running and in parallel is absolutely a great and real bit of modern sourcing that we see more and more. I think on the supplier collaboration, that's maybe the biggest part for me in terms of the change. So in the last 10 years, the classic cliche of partner or working with a supplier is increasingly true, but still difficult. But building in what we see is building in the opportunity to collaborate with a supplier or suppliers during that RFP process is absolutely best practice, and completely different to the old school RFP where the supplier got the spec, they responded, there's no interaction, there's no cross-fertilisation. So for us, at the very, very minimum, get a good, solid investment of the client's time before the response is issued, so that they can inform and get feedback, pre-feedback from the client, and then also once the bid's on the table, there are 2 major collaboration windows I think is best practice. And I think that softer mindset we see definitely prevailing. So the final thought on shut up is maybe the critical path in a lot of the thinking, particularly focused on the contracting stage, but with long tails before and after that, is what is the solution going to be? So what are we actually going to, what do we really need, what's it going to look like, what's going to work well, what's going to add value? And I think that's the critical path through most of this for me. And I think there's a growing realisation that how do you really unpick that? How do you finesse that solution when you've got arm's length relationships with multiple suppliers, people away on a holiday? How do you do that? And I think the clients, buyers that struggle the most are those that have the least mature understanding of what they've got. So they don't have a clear process taxonomy, they don't have a clear vision of where they're going, they don't have at least an outline idea about how procure tech or emerging technology is going to change their operations. Contrast that with a well-informed, mature buyer. Now that's a big gap to breach, but I think as a best practice I'd add to the list is making sure that roadmap is clear on the buyer side. And that's when you can start, or you need to start maybe years in advance of an RFP. So try and develop that roadmap as a way of informing and accelerating the solution.
Yeah, great. Thanks, Paul. And don't worry about shutting up. One of the problems with the chairperson is usually to try and get people to talk, so you never want your panellists to really shut up. I just interrupt. So let me just check to see whether, is everybody comfortable with all of that? Does anybody have a different take? Does anybody want to emphasise a particular aspect of modern sourcing that they think is particularly important? Or are we on the right lines? You see, I knew Carsten couldn't resist.
I think the first thing is the idea that we need a new label at all. So I remember the NOA, we were arguing about not even using the word outsourcing and flipped sourcing. Then we had the wonderful Kate Filisek with vested sourcing, and now we've got modern sourcing. And there is a little bit of me saying, is anyone telling procurement? Or is anyone telling the CIPD? Because these could all be in a vacuum if we're not educating. And you and I had a conversation, Chris, just a few weeks ago about even the way procurement is educated now. This is we are probably in the choir because we believe in all of this. but there is a challenge for this to go deeper into the organisations and actually, you know, and I've been on the sides of very long scale procurements, sometimes for 2 years, sometimes shorter but much more deeper, and some of them are sector led, and some of them are even just where the procurement comes from, whether it's a third party procurement that's already been sourced to actually provide the service. So I think there's a whole ecosystem stuff going on, but I'm not sure, you know, it's like I used to say, is there procurement in the metaverse? Who knows? You know,
Yeah,
so
yeah.
these are challenges, I think. You know, these are all right, absolute right ways forward, but it's a long road to climb.
Yeah, great, thank you, William. Yes, sir.
I think just in response to that, and coming from a professional procurement perspective, I think you meant CIPS, not CIPD.
Oh,
Okay.
apologies.
As a fellow, someone who's been teaching this for 30 years, I mean, procurement are at the forefront of this.
Procurement, sorry.
Procurement people,
Yeah.
professionals, full-time training people.
Yeah.
I was involved in a SAP S4 procurement last year. It lasted 12 months instead of 3, purely on users and designers and bidders, not on the procurement side. So I think that sourcing and procurement people are fully aware. I would say the barriers are not there. And we've been talking about model sourcing since when I was teaching in 1997. So
Yeah, yeah,
Not
respond
procurement.
back there. Yeah. Great, thank you for that. I mean, I think, you know, as an educationalist myself, it's always a challenge when you're trying to follow all of the developments that are going on in industries to make sure that all of the material is bang up to date, is right there where it needs to be. Because material takes a long time to develop, a long time to publish, and there's these new things that come along. And I think it's important for the bigger organisations to try to make sure there are ways in which we can take the base knowledge and apply it in real situations so that people do get a sense of what is really sort of new and important and current thinking. What the real challenges are, because it's great to read it on a page, but it's only when you start doing it that you realise actually that's where, you know, when the rubber hits the road. But really important point. David, you've heard some other developments of your views. What's your reflection on that?
Well, obviously everyone is right, but no, I mean, I do think one of the reasons why I was really passionate about modern sourcing as a mindset is because, to go to the gentleman's point at the back, this isn't anything new, and also we're not trying to get people.
Yeah.
If you go to a procurement team and say you've now got to learn a new way of doing things, I mean, not again. We did that with this, and we did that with that. I think it's about people thinking, okay, how can we continually improve? We don't have to do it the old way. There are new things we can learn from. And even getting to a level of collaboration with your providers might be something you've not done before, but take the risk and try it. So I think it's really important that for me it is that do the bits that you can control, and actually it's not about saying, right, we're going to go to every procurement team in the land and train them on modern sourcing, and analysts and advisors and consultants will make a fortune out of running all these training courses and programs.
Yeah.
But it's about just saying there are different things that you can do, look at sourcing in a different way, do what you can control the controllables, but push the boundaries. And I think I think we'll get there. And then procurement people are smart. Most procurement people are smart. So
Just checking, is that right?
You're keeping up on either procurement. So they will find ways of doing things better and smarter if they're allowed to. And I think it's the encouragement as well of you don't have to do it. You don't have to do it in the way you've always done it.
Yeah.
You can actually try some things differently.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, great point. Let me just move the conversation on to really try to understand if we choose to explore what we're calling modern sourcing, what difference is it going to make? So David, again, you had some thoughts around what the difference might be, but Melanie, what's your experience of what differences we can make using these approaches?
What, to the outcomes or just differences in how we operate through the process?
You can choose how you answer it.
Alright, well I'm going to answer it in a slightly different way then, because I ran 3 BPO workshops with 3 different suppliers yesterday for a client, and some of this is really fresh in my mind, so it reminded me of the fact that it's about our ability to adopt and change and adapt. And I think modern sourcing, and I'm going to look through a supplier lens right now, you know, it requires, you're almost on stage the entire time. You're not hiding behind a couple of presentations and an RFP submission. Every transaction, every interaction you have with the buyer client is part of the experience and is creating a sense and a feel. So the NDA interactions, the emails, how you show up as a team. This sort of approach requires more of your organisation to be on show to the world. So these workshops yesterday had Chief Procurement Officer, Chief People Officer, technical people, sales people, all parts of the business, and often those parts of the business aren't on show. So it's really important that anyone involved in this process understands their role to play. Everybody has a role to play. Everyone is part of the solution. So what doesn't work very well is when the teams don't act as a team, they don't show up as one, they're not well briefed, they don't understand what they're doing there. One of the suppliers, there was a lot of tension in the room. Well, the client felt that, I felt that, and I thought, well, gosh, what are they going to be like to work with if they don't even work very well together? So I think it's this concept of your whole organisation as a supplier, and actually as suppliers too, but the whole organisation is on show and part of the evaluation. And you're assessing on the culture, the relationship. It's no longer just price or your liability cap or how great your SaaS solution is. It's your culture. And that is what is being assessed in all of those interactions. And you know, most processes will evaluate you on that as well. So I think that is something that I yesterday just brought it right back up to the top for me of how we all show up matters in these processes, because you're showing the clients, the buyers, how you're going to behave post-contract. And arguably you're your best behaviour in the sales process, right? Let's just be honest. If you can't show up well in that process, what's it going to be like after post-contract signature, or during delivery, or when you have your first dispute? How's that going to work? So that would be my start on answering that question.
Thank you. Paul, do you want to develop that?
Yeah,
a little further?
Yeah, it's a key question about the value. So speaking as an advisor, the big debates about the long-term value of outsourcing and impact, and I personally believe that it's a supremely effective option and lever for most organisations out there. I think what's the point? Accelerating the procurement process itself is not a big ticket in terms of the big scheme of the potential of a sourcing. That's a nice to have, and enables the organisation to procure more and work on more fronts. So I think that's a benefit. For me, it's all about the outcome. So what is the objective of the source? What are the outcomes that are sought? David, I think, was talking about earlier on about cost, being back at the top of the agenda. Again, so if you take that as the fundamental premise, if we're talking about an outsourcing that's going to take make a material impact in cost efficiency, then you want to have that as soon as possible. And many organisations out there have got complex, difficult operating environments, profit warnings, a lot of change. So getting that benefit quickly can make a real difference. Different to shared services or GBS, which might be a multi-year investment, which is good for many other reasons, but it's not big bang in the same way. So getting there quickly can be really important. I think the bigger value, though, is a modern, well-run procurement is going to have a significant impact on the level of benefit you're going to get, as opposed to maybe getting an incremental saving. A really well designed collaborative process has a massively different level of run rate, let's say, saving or efficiency saving or impact on revenue if it's sales, for example. So the outcome can change significantly, and we work with the rule of thumb that you can build in year-on-year efficiency as well. So each year the pricing may come down on average by 4%, used to be the benchmark. That's near an 8% year-on-year improvement you see in well-run procurements at the moment. So those are really big numbers, and you want to get there as soon as possible. And then finally, well-run, modern sourced activity is going to have a much better opportunity to be successful over the 5 years or whatever of the term. So we get asked to repair, remediate, outsourcing work that's just got lost, that's not creating value, that's broken, and that will rarely be where you've had a collaborative process to really get the best and find the right solution, the right chemistry in a collaborative way at the start of the process. So all of those are big items for me.
Yeah, great. Thank you, Paul. Danny, you were talking a lot about relationships and collaboration. So I guess you would echo all of those thoughts.
Yeah, well, I think that's the important thing. I mean, at the end of the day, you can shorten the procurement process, and you shorten the procurement process. That is it. But definitely getting the savings, the benefit. The reason you're buying something is it's going to drive something within the business. But also, if you get the relationship right at the beginning, then actually transition, delivery, time to efficiency, competence, whatever, start delivering the business result is much easier. And so much time is spent in a sourcing or vendor management team trying to manage the ongoing relationship, that if you've got it wrong at the start, you're always fighting. We always used to say, if you pull the statement of work out, you've lost. I mean, you've lost the relationship, you have to pull the contract out.
Yeah.
So actually getting clarity up front, agreeing all those things, getting any of the ambiguities out, so you're not thinking, oh, I've got one over on them and I've hidden that and then we'll make them do it later on. So the relationship is going to be key, because you are stuck with these relationships, negative connotation of stuck, but you're stuck with these relationships for 3 to 5 years. You need to get it right at the beginning, and I think that's so important.
Yeah, for sure. Let me just develop it a little bit further. I'm always interested to, when you come along to these things, and I think there's sometimes a presumption that we're talking about a particular type of organisation, maybe one of the really big organisations. So I'm working with something a lot smaller. Well, this is not really for me. But David, how would you characterise where modern sourcing is actually relevant? Is it a kind of, everyone, or is it big organisations, small?
I think it's everyone, and the reason being is because, as I've said, I'm repeating myself, but because it's a mindset thing, it doesn't matter whether you're spending 5 million or 100 million or 500 million.
Yeah.
Thinking about, okay, how do I improve this process? Is it through the type of people that I'm deploying, how I structure? Is it what I'm buying, how I'm buying it, how I'm working with the service providers? All those things are going to be important whether you're buying something for 100,000 or 100 million. Sure. So it can apply, because it isn't a big overblown process that we're trying to overlay on everything, saying you have to follow this and you have to build a team of 50 people to do this. It's a way of looking at how you do things and thinking about how you improve it. So that can work for anything.
Yeah, for sure. Melanie, what's your thoughts? Is it for everyone?
I agree, it's for everyone. The beauty of modern sourcing is you can tweak it to suit the situation. So in a regulated environment or public sector, you can still use elements of some of the things we're talking about. You don't have to be stuck to all of the traditional ways of doing things. Big organisations it works for, but equally, I did a 6-week agile sourcing engagement for a fintech firm a little while ago who just wanted a new tech resourcing partner. They had no procurement team. They knew the outcome they wanted, the board wanted, and we cracked on and did that for them. So we just flew in, did a piece of work, delivered the partner with the contract, and then left again. So I think it has a place everywhere. I think the important thing is begin with the end in mind, quote Cody.
Sure. Yeah. That was pretty bad in my mind.
And win-win, to quote him again.
Yeah, for sure. Paul?
Just one add. I agree that these practices have got great reusability and applicability. I suppose the thing that strikes me is that the impact of modern sourcing techniques it does vary depending on the context. I think everything we talk about up here and in the sessions is very context specific. Not all sourcing is the same. So I'm thinking one of the goals of modern sourcing might be more outcome-based thinking, more outcome-based impact, which is great. But if the process I'm working on is a narrowly defined part of, I don't know, payroll transactions or cash collection that's woven into a wider client process, then it's very difficult to impact outcomes. So what I'm saying is that depending on the nature of the work, depending on the industry, depending on the duration of the vision, so I think maybe a longer term engagement is better for investing in collaboration, and thinking about transformation, about making exciting new stuff happen, whereas if it's a short-term, more transactional piece of sourcing, then it's going to be less ambitious, I think. So all of these things frame the potential of what sourcing can do. And I think the final point to note is, again, driven by the work you're talking about, there's always a technology layer that is important, and that's going to frame what can be done. It's going to frame the roadmap for the next few years. So if I'm working in accounts payable and we're going to make a move to S4 in the next few years, that's going to determine some of the investments that are going to be possible and the functionality that's on the table. And that's doesn't close everything down, but these are parameters.
Let me just ask everybody to give some thought to these questions. So, if you had to look at your organisation and listen to what we've been talking about here in terms of what counts as modern sourcing, then who in this room sees that their organisation is doing an awful lot of this stuff? This is part of the approach that he's taking. Put your prominent hands, or you're not prominent hands, whichever you feel you want to put up. Who would say that in your organisations there's a lot of this that's being done? Okay, so I would have said that that's probably about 10%, no more than that of the room. Who in the room thinks their organisation is doing a bit? Towing the water, doing a bit of that? Who thinks that we're doing all of this stuff? Which means that there's a whole load of it that says, well, I don't know, is that true? Yeah, a lot of people that are just not sure. Okay, so let's just move things on just a little bit more to think about what the challenges might be. So there's a lot in the audience that perhaps need to go on a journey to start adopting these types of approaches. So what are the challenges that we're faced with? Paul, let's start with you. What sort of things do you think we've got to overcome here?
I think we touched on a few of them already. I mean, I think real life is the challenge. It can get in the way of some of the more sort of forward-thinking activities. I mean, if I think about some of the BPOs I'm advising on at the moment, there's always a challenge of bandwidth, getting people aligned before this. To be honest, I don't see procurement as the bottleneck. It's almost always as the gentleman's comment, it's almost always the business's availability to help define what it is they want. And so, the most detailed parts of any contract would be around the scope of work and the process definition, and very often that doesn't exist. So, getting that ready is a massive challenge. I'd start with that as a starting example.
Yeah, David, what's your thought?
Yeah, just one point on that. I mean, I think that I would hate the fact that anyone walks away and starts talking to the business about we're doing modern sourcing now, because actually I think that turns the business off and go, oh, here we go again. This is another flavour of the month. And actually talking about we've got a better way of doing this and we'll get results for you better, will get the business involved more than saying we've got a brand new way of modern sourcing. Yeah. But the one challenge I think I've got real world experience of is it is about getting people thinking about looking at the requirements differently. So real world example, we touched on impact sourcing, but when I was trying to buy some impact source call centre agents about 4 years ago, we couldn't get there because our requirement said they have to have 2 years of customer service experience. Well, you're not going to get 2 years of customer service experience if they're impact source workers. So we had to change the business mindset to say, but why do we need that? Well, we've always needed that. So the biggest challenge is getting people to think differently, and that's why, again, I just think it's really important that we talk about we've got different ways of doing it, but we're not going to label it, because labelling it just makes it seem like another procurement initiative that is going to fall on deaf ears.
Yeah. Melanie?
I think there's already been some good answers to this question, but I think it's preparation. So on the client side, it's really important to know what outcomes you're looking for. So, is there a business case? What are the outcomes? What is actually required here? I know it sounds really, really simple, but often those things aren't necessarily agreed upon across the different parts of a business. So the preparation around that, investing time and effort to make sure everyone's on the same page about the outcomes they want, and preparation on the supplier side as well. So, okay, great, we're going to be engaged in this process now. What do we need to do to be able to show up professionally and give ourselves the best chance of winning? We might have a 25% or 33%, depending on the number of suppliers in the process, win chance. You've got 0 win chance if you've done no preparation, you don't show up well for those sessions. So for me, it's all about preparation, because condensing the timelines, we do eliminate a lot of waste by doing that, which is great. But it does condense the amount of work to be done in a period of time. So as much prep and planning that you can do ahead of starting the process is critical. So it would be prep and planning.
Yeah. So, what do you think in the audience? What do you think the challenges actually might be, Terry?
Yeah, a challenge, I guess, and a question for the panel is, what do you think? I can see the potential that the challenge is a lack of standards. So all of the things that you're saying are fundamentally sensible and will improve the process of selling and buying technology and business services. But the things that you've mentioned are all slightly different and nuanced in a different way. And therefore, if I'm from a perspective of a provider, I've got to go into every client engagement and learn how they're doing modern sourcing versus knowing that everybody does agile sourcing or sourcing in a different way, and therefore being able to adapt to it. And that's quite a big overhead on a provider to kind of understand your way of buying as a buyer. So yeah, interested in the perspective on how you overcome that challenge, and is it that there needs to be a standard that people adhere to or subscribe to?
But can I answer a question to your question, if I may? I know you shouldn't ask, I'll answer a question to your question. But didn't you find that even 10 years ago, every procurement organisation bought in a different way? So everyone, I've worked in different procurement organisations, and you think that we're all buying the same thing in the same way, but you're not. So actually I don't think it's that different to the way it's always been. It's just we're starting to call it modern sourcing now, and it'll be something you've got to learn. But I do think that procurement has always operated in a different way depending on the organisation, the background of the individuals, the characters of the individuals even. So I don't think it's necessarily any harder for people selling, but I don't think it's any easier either, and definitely having a level of standardisation. But then people still get, even if we had a standard, I think people will still take that and interpret it differently. ISO 9001, when that came out years ago, everyone said, oh, it's going to make everything standard, but actually, depending on what you're doing in your context, it's different. So, yeah, I'm not sure if we would fix the problem, and I think procurement has always bought in different ways.
Yeah, before I ask Melanie and Paul, the gentleman at the back, I suspected you had a thought.
Well, I thought the very first thing was maybe the word modern. I'm thinking modern art, which I think stopped in 1910.
Yeah,
the word modern, contemporary might be a better word, but just back to that last point, I think that you know, if we look at construction contracts, completely different, but there is standardisation there, ICE, JCT, etc. So I think there is learnings from, far be it for me to recommend public sector contracting, but they have some standardised contracts which Logan Hayden builders use, QSs use. There might be some learning there for ICT as well.
Yeah.
But procurement are generally a friend of standardisation, I should say. Again, they're held back by people who want a tailored solution just for them.
Yeah.
So that'd be my bias point.
Yeah, it makes life a little easier for procurement. Melanie, what's your thought? You've had a lot of experience from that supplier side that Terry's alluding to.
I think there's probably two parts. I mean, the first part is, when I sat supplier side, I was just happy that there was a process that someone was following, albeit it might be different in each sector or client. Just to have a process that you're actually being, you know, you're on a journey, you know the journey, you know the start, the middle, the end, and you know it's going to happen, is better than many sourcing processes I was ever involved in when I was a supplier in our world.
Yeah.
I think we've come along a bit, but I still think that there is a risk loads of these things never come to fruition. The second thing is, the number one complaint I always had, and that I hear from suppliers now as well, is we don't get enough time with the client, we don't get the ability to do this, which is, you know, that collaboration and co-creation you cannot do through an arm's length RFP process. So I would say, I have some sympathy, but at least in these processes, however they're adopted, the more modern way of sourcing is to spend more time, more face time, whether that be on Teams or face-to-face, but more face time doing co-creation, and that can only be better for the supply community, I would say.
Paul?
I agree with that. I mean, a lot of sympathy. I think it's a great question and a real challenge. I don't see an easy solution to it. I think the mindset and the engagement you get from modern sourcing, I think, provides more information than many suppliers had maybe 10 years ago. More sharing of clear timeline criteria and so on. I think it's generally better. I think in some processes, technology is providing a more predictable footprint of some activities, but even in an area like AP, it's still highly varied and complex, so I don't see any way through that. But I think, as Melanie's saying, using that engagement, I think one mitigation of the investment that you talk about, Terry, which is massive on the supply side, is that well-run process should narrow the field fairly quickly as possible. In a quicker way, I think, with much better engagement, testing the chemistry up front and removing people who should be on the list quickly, if not with the desired outcome, at least as a fair outcome to offset some of that investment.
Yeah. Are there any other suppliers in the room? So, what would your thought be? I'm sorry,
I'm Ben from Teleperformance, so we supply BPO and outsourcing and offshoring. I would really like to agree with Melanie, and I think it comes back to culture, but culture from and almost values and visions from the CEO, CIO, from the board level of the buyer side, but also the culture of the supplier, because we all agree that I think the process is, it can be long, can be short, can be right or wrong, however way you do it. I think we all want collaboration. But I think fundamentally, if the senior people within the client side and that Teleperformance or a supply side are about collaboration and say, look guys, come together. So the solutions team, the sales team, or the procurement or the legal team from the supply side. If it's driven down from the CEO or the CIO or someone at a very high level that says, look guys, culturally we need to work together, then it's fundamentally much easier, I think, for things to work better and for the process to be streamlined. Because if you're constantly saying, well, I've got a hierarchy to fight as well, that becomes a challenge. Whereas if you haven't got that hierarchy, you can just bring everyone together. Like Melanie said, if you bring your best team together initially, and there's a vision and a cultural thing that blocks that. Because most of what, from a sales perspective, obviously I want to bring my best game to and our solutions team, sometimes we joke that our solutions teams are the guys that say, well no, we can't do that, it's too costly, or that can't be done, the client doesn't understand from a technology point of view what's needed. So I think it fundamentally just comes down to culture and vision, maybe, that's the biggest challenge.
Yeah, for sure. There's a couple of other suppliers back, so what's your thoughts about this?
Thank you. I'm curious from a supplier side as to how we help enable the modern sourcing approach, or how do we push for it? Because I think even if you just look around the room, when people put their hands up, we're dealing with a lot of buyers that don't have those processes in place. We've got our own kind of requirements around cash flow and like where contracts fall. So how do we push for that?
David.
Yeah, I would say, coming from the buyer side, I'm always a bit sceptical when a service provider is pushing for a particular way of working, because you start thinking, well, are they trying to push me down the route I don't want to go? So I would say do it softly, but I definitely would say if you can demonstrate the value that it can bring in terms of we can get to that delivery of services faster, we can give you that output faster, and then I think there's a level of encouragement. But I would say if a provider was trying to push me down that route, I would immediately be a bit worried about that and actually want to control the process a bit more. But I'm probably an old school procurement person, so maybe I'm not the best example. But
I think it depends on your relationship with the client, or if it's a client or a prospect, for starters. Prospect would probably have that. If you have a level of business and you're already a trusted advisor, then maybe you talk about things like today, challenge them a little bit nicely, point towards other projects or other clients in that sector that have taken a different approach and got great outcomes. Our industry is all about referrals, and I think if you are able to point them towards someone who's got value out of a process who they're connected to or in the same industry, then that's probably one of the best ways to encourage someone to think about things differently.
Paul?
You never know, they might already be thinking about it, but you're bubbling it up to the, to be top of mind.
And that comes back to, within the RFP process, quite often the client will specify you've got to have certain case studies and certain references from certain sectors. And if you can work collaboratively and say, well, we've done something in this world that might be of interest to you, it can add value to the client.
Yeah, thank you for that. Paul, do you have any other?
I think it's very well put point. I mean, ultimately, I think it's around just awareness that other ways are possible, and there is evidence for it being value adding. I guess the killer of doing things differently is just believing there is only one way.
Well, just quickly, I totally agree with Melanie's point as well. It depends on the relationship. So if you're an incumbent but you've been really difficult to do business with for that 2 or 3 years, then you want to change the way you're doing it. That's when you also, the radar comes on, you're like, why are they trying to push us down that route? But if you've had a great relationship, I think it's much easier to get people to move in a different way and talk about the joint value that you can deliver for the business versus it being seen as some sort of manipulation. So it will depend, I think, on the relationship that you've had as well.
So let's just, we need to start coasting into landing on this particular session. The time's flown by. Well, for me anyway. For you, I think, no, I can't think of that. What would your recommendations be in terms of actually going away and doing something? So what is it that people might want to take away as an action after today? Paul, let's start with you.
That's a good one. I think there's...
It's only one. You only got one thing. It's going to be your best one. It's going to be a real cracker.
What if we peak too early?
That's life.
Let's think. I think I'm kind of cheating here because I'm not answering your question, but I think it's. I do think we should acknowledge. We talk about modern sourcing, the role of technology. I see changing in the asks that clients are making and the way that buyers are using that. And I think that's got to be front and centre of the competences of a successful procurement function at the moment. Is being able to challenge and interrogate and understand, not being the SME on each area, but really being able to do that. So I think about, for example, a boring old finance BPO, procurement needing to guide new technology, better dashboarding, use of process mining, task mining, in and around that wrapper. I think procurement's got a great opportunity to be able to make those sorts of investments much more valuable, so continue to raise the game in that space.
Yeah, great. Thank you. Paul, Melanie?
I already think there's flavours of this happening to varying degrees across our industry. So my advice is going to be to the supply community. Suppliers, we have been trying to drive change in our industry. It is changing. If you're not already seeing it, it will do. Challenge your own organisations to behave differently. I've sat at the front in supplier organisations and been asked to respond to a contract as part of an RFP process, and I've had fights with general counsels, CIOs, CFOs. No, we need to give our best position now, we'll get thrown out of the process if we don't. No one listened to me, we got thrown out of the process. That will happen. Show up with your best offer, be brave, but that means your entire business is going to have to behave differently in your pursuit of winning clients. And that will mean you can't go after perhaps as many opportunities as you have done historically. So think long and hard about how you qualify deals to work on, because you can't half show up in these processes. It's very, very obvious. And it's also very obvious when you're showing up to be successful and you're worthy of your place, because that shows in the process as well. So that would be my sort of takeaway if I was in the supply community.
David?
Yeah, maybe I'll take it from the buyer perspective. I think from the buyer perspective, totally agree with Melanie that you need to think about how you internalise it for yourself, first of all. The biggest fear we always had was when our CPO used to go to a conference, come back and go, we're now doing this, because he's heard it at a conference. And without it being like contextualised, as Paul was saying as well. So I think it would be about internalising it, but then also challenging yourself to think about how do I bring, especially for strategic sourcing, how do I bring the suppliers into this to do that more collaboration? And let's forget about treating them like enemy. And the whole win-win often is seen as cheesy, but how do you work collaboratively to get the right solution? And that will drive a win-win. So I would say internalise and challenge the norm as well.
Yeah, great, thank you for that. From my standpoint, and when I've spent the last working with Kerry in particular, last 15, 20 years, banging on about procurement, sourcing within the context of relationships. Fundamentally, that's what we're trying to do, is to bring together organisations in a mutually beneficial relationship. And process can quite often get in the way of that. And what I like about the discussions around modern source that we've had today is that it keeps coming back to collaboration. This is what really makes it all tick. And yes, we need standards, that's often going to be really useful, but we also need the collaboration. So I think it all comes back, for me, down to that notion of relationships and working hard and making sure that those are working for all the parties. Let me thank my esteemed, my illustrious panel for your concise but useful and valuable answers. Thank you as well for you for listening, and also for those people that contributed. Fantastic. Enjoy the rest of the